Hello, everyone. So welcome and thank you for joining us today for the Sage Campus webinar on writing a winning research proposal. I can see that some people are still joining us, so we will give them a couple of more minutes. And while they're joining, I will do a bit of housekeeping. So could you please take a moment to check your settings and make sure that you can hear me and see the presentation? And if you have any issues with your audio, try rejoining and choosing the correct audio option. If you have any persistent issues, please post them in the chat box and our moderator, Anne, will respond directly to them. Please do feel free to ask your questions as we go along and post them in the Q&A box that you can see in the bottom at the bottom of your screen. Anne will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A box, so she will answer any of these questions and we will get also to some of your questions at the end during the Q&A. Lastly, today's session is being recorded and the recording will be emailed to you all along with some useful links in a couple of days. I think we are at time, so it's 4 p.m. where I am now. And if everyone is ready, let's get started. So hello and welcome again. Thank you for joining us today for the Sage Campus webinar on writing a winning research proposal. I'm Paulina and I'm Senior Marketing Manager for Sage Campus. And joining me today is our very special guest and Sage author, Dr. Zina O'Leary. Zina is an adjunct professor at the University of Delaware and senior fellow at the Australia and New Zealand School of Government. She's an internationally recognized leader in research methodologies and has a keen interest in the application of research to evidence-based decision-making. And here is what we will cover today. I'll start by giving you an introduction to Sage Publishing, and then I will give you a quick overview of what Sage Campus is, one of our newest digital library resources. Then we'll hear from our wonderful Dr. Zina O'Leary about her research proposal online course and advice on how to craft a winning research proposal. Then we'll look at some examples how other institutions and lecturers are using campus online courses in teaching and learning. And at the end, we will have some time for your questions. So for those who are less familiar with Sage Publishing, we were founded over 50 years ago by Sarah Miller McEwen. Last year, Sarah transferred control of the company to an independent trust, guaranteeing its independence indefinitely. Sage is driven by the belief that social and behavioral science has the power to improve society. We have supported both research and higher education instruction for decades. We publish impactful scholarship, enable research methodology, and produce high-quality educational resources. Both in the resources we publish and in practice, Sage embraces critical social issues such as diversity and inclusion, digital research access, freedom of speech, and freedom to learn. We support every part of the academic life cycle. And now, what is Sage Campus? So Sage Campus is a new digital library resource that supports the teaching and learning of skills and research methods through over 280 hours of structured online learning. Sage Campus contains 34 online courses at the moment, and we're adding 3 more next year. One of our key missions at Sage Campus is to help institutions in improving learning outcomes, research outcomes, and employability. Pedagogy is at the heart of Sage Campus. For each course, we think carefully about who our learner is, what their learning goals might be, and how best to teach these topics. The pedagogical mix of content included in each course is carefully devised based on well-known learning design principles, such as the ADDIE framework and the Open University Learning Design methodology. We're passionate about modeling university design for learning guidelines too, to ensure that we develop meaningful learning opportunities for everyone. All our courses are fully self-paced to fit around your busy schedules, but also structured to provide a scaffolded learning experience. We have an expert instructor at the heart of each course who has helped design the course. Our courses use an engaging mix of activity types such as videos, screencasts, time quizzes, checklists, downloadable data sets, and much more. There are also knowledge checks and formative assessments throughout the courses. And at the end, if you complete all the assessments, you will receive a certificate, which is always a bonus. Our course topics and learning pathways are designed to support the lifespan of academic study and practice, from critical thinking, planning your research, collecting and analyzing data, to getting published in a reputable journal. So on your screen, you can see all the courses that are currently available within the campus suite. There are 34 courses. Here, you can also see them mapped to the stages of academic study and practice they support. There is a strong focus on research skills and working with data, topics that universities told us are important to them, and the students and researchers usually struggle with, and faculty find difficult to teach sometimes, or perhaps don't have time to teach and need some extra support. So, and now I'm really excited to introduce to you our research proposal course. So this is the course from Dr. Zina O'Leary, and research proposal course gives you an understanding of elements and purpose of research proposal, strategies to avoid common pitfalls when preparing your proposal, and it also provides you with a step-by-step plan to craft a winning proposal. This is one of our flagship courses, and it has been recently awarded an Apex Grant Award for Publishing Excellence. We're thrilled to have been recognized in this way. Not only does Zina truly understand the challenges and the questions that the researchers face when compiling a research proposal, it is her passionate and engaging way of supporting learners through these challenges that sets this course apart. So at this point, I will stop sharing my screen and I will hand over to Zina to lend her experience on how to craft a winning research proposal. So to get us started, Zina, could you please tell us what the importance and the purpose of research proposal is?
Oh, well, thank you very much. Proposals are so important, and basically, I think two levels we're working at. I think every student should see proposals as an opportunity to really get their thinking together. When you're starting a research process, particularly for the first time, it's a very different academic endeavor. When you're learning, what you're doing is taking information that's already out there and putting it in your brain. When you're doing research, you're actually creating new knowledge. And that process means taking in all the information that's already out there, trying to come up with an original question, and then trying to come up with a design that will get you the answer to that question. So almost everyone I've worked with at every level of research has their mind absolutely swirling, particularly at the early ages. And when you are forced to do a proposal, and nobody does a proposal unless they have to, you are given really the opportunity to get your thinking in order. There are certain things you must do to take that swirl in your brain and put it out there in a way that is logical and consistent. So you are forced to really consolidate your thinking, to get a very strong research question, to be able to articulate a rationale for why this question is important. and then to propose and justify the methods that you think will best answer those questions. So it really is an opportunity to get that all together. The other aspect of proposals is that it is a hurdle requirement for whatever you want to do. It's a hurdle to getting money. It's a hurdle to acceptance into programs. It's a hurdle for ethical approval to collect data. So it is, I think, the most stringent of research documents. You need to pull it together in a way where others can judge. Even when you're at this really preliminary stage, their job is to judge whether or not you are up to the task. So that proposal is a very, very critical document. So those two opportunities, get your thinking together and show others that you are ready for whatever you are applying for.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds like it's a critical part of when a student or a researcher starts their research or thesis. And in terms of the content, what content should a well-prepared research proposal contain?
Well, generally, there's two types of applications that most students have to deal with. One is a research proposal to get accepted to do research, to get into a PhD program or a master's program or some sort of approval. The other is an ethics application. So a research proposal, so you have ethical approval. So they're a little bit separate. So I'll talk about the first one, which is getting into a program. There are overlaps between both. Basically, what you want to do content-wise is to be able to have a very, very strong research question. That is the whole endeavor of research, is to answer a question that we haven't asked in a particular way. So the content is really around a very strong research question. I've been teaching research methods now for probably 30 years. And there are PhD students who come up to me 2 years down the track and say, "Oh, can you help me with this? What do you think about my methods?" And they'll talk for half hour and I'll say, "Well, what is your research question?" And then they'll go on for another 40 minutes because they cannot articulate it. They're not sure. And I can't advise anyone until they have a clear research question, because I can't give them an answer if I don't know what they want to know. And so that's the main bit of content you have to nail, is getting a good research question. And then once I have that research question, I'm going to ask, well, why do we need to know that? Why is that important? Why do I have to give you approval or give you money to do this? What's the significance? So that rationale becomes really important. The context and the rationale for why answering this question is of value to the organization, to society, to community, whoever the target might be that you're trying to help. Generally, we're talking about some sort of situation improvement or new knowledge that will help situations. Then we move towards research methods. And here, what we want to know is whether or not you understand methods enough that you will be able to get credible answers to the question that we now have determined is very valuable. Valuable question. Do you have the methods well thought out enough that you can get to the answer? Now, this can be quantitative, it can be qualitative, it can be mixed, it can be innovative, it can be experimental. But what you need to show is that what you're proposing will actually give you credible answers to the question that you ask. So that's the other bit of content. That methods is absolutely essential. Then we're also going to see a lot of references and a bit of a lit review or a reference list. And that's to show that you know the field. When you're proposing research, you are not inventing the wheel. You are adding on to a body of knowledge. So we want to see that you know that body of knowledge. So those are the three main things. Do you have a good question? Do you have a way of getting answers? And do you know what's out there in the field? That's what you have to prove in a proposal. If you're doing ethics, there's an even stronger emphasis on the methods, particularly in relation to doing no harm to any of your participants, making sure everything is ethical and above board, that you're not duping anyone, that you're not putting anyone any emotional or physical harm, making sure that there's no power relations, So there's an extra emphasis on making sure if you're ready to collect data, that you're not going to be doing anything that will cause any sort of damage to participants or reputational damage to the organization that you're sitting under, the university or sometimes a department. So that's what I would cover.
That sounds really good. And I know you've already mentioned some of the challenges related to the research proposal. Could you talk a little bit about some of the most common mistakes that you've seen that the researchers or students make, and what are the best practices to avoid these mistakes?
Okay. The one thing, I'll give you the things that really make me shake my head. And there's two. One is that a research question is a question. It's not a statement. It's not an idea. It is not a theme. It's actually a question. It should start with a question word and end with a question mark. If you have a topic, your research can take off in 10 directions. Who are you talking about? Why are you talking about them? How did it work? When you have those specifics in your research question, now I know what you want to do. So if they ask for a research question, give them a research question. The second hurdle is, and this is technical as well, you must follow the directions. I know that sounds a little bit blasé, but one of the challenging things about doing research is getting people to complete. You don't fail research. What you do is not finish. So they want to make sure that you're able to dot your I's and cross your T's and be on time. So follow the directions. When they say a minimum of or a maximum of 75 words, don't give them 76. If they say that they want a sentence of 20 words, give them 20 words. Give them exactly what they want. Make sure every box that they want ticked is ticked. Because when you make those types of errors, the message that you're giving those people who are assessing you is that you're sloppy, you don't pay attention, or you don't care. So I know it's a bit pedantic, but making sure you follow all the requirements. I oversee a subject in Australia for the Australian New Zealand School of Government, and I have 20 research teams, and they all have to put in ethics applications. And these are very high-level students doing an executive master's, some of whom even have PhDs. And I have somebody who checks off the applications. More than half of them have to go back for silly mistakes. Silly mistakes where you didn't check this, you didn't do this, you didn't have the consent form in, and it is exasperating. And I don't look at them, and I'm glad I don't, because it might give me a bad taste when it does come in done, because it's given me extra work that I don't need. So do that. Make sure you have a question and make sure everything is filled in exactly. Those are really the technical bits. A meatier issue is just not being ready to make the hard decisions about what you want to know. So do you want to know why this happened? Do you want to know who it happened to? Do you want to understand the circumstances of how this occurs? You have to make those decisions. You can't leave things loose. And so this is where I was saying that research proposals are an opportunity, because you're forced in that moment to decide. Doesn't mean you can't shift things later and have it grow and change and have your question adapt as you delve into literature, or you realize your methods aren't accurate, or it's been done before. You can change it, but for a moment, you have to get it all together. You have to be able to clearly articulate to someone in really what amounts to less than 1,000 words, what you want to do, why it's important, how you're going to do it, and that you are the person for the job. So those would be the hurdles.
Thank you, Zina. Really helpful, and I'm sure it's very helpful for everyone who is attending. And in the registration form, we had a few questions from some of our attendees. And one of the questions, I think, relates to these technical difficulties and challenges. And this is around the word limit. So some grant proposals have a certain number of word limits. So how can you present all the important elements of your research proposal within such a small space?
I think it was Ben Franklin said, if I had more time, I would have written less. It is incredibly difficult to take everything that's swirling around in your brain, 3,000 words worth of stuff, and get it down to 200 words. But that's really what you have to do. So it is first clarifying in your brain, what is it that you want to know? An exercise that I have all of my students do is articulate your research questions in 20 words or less. That means getting rid of all the unnecessary clauses, all the unnecessary context, making sure that it is unambiguous and as clear as possible. And that is such a challenge in itself. And it just takes draft after draft and checking in with others. And then I would do an approach when I'm looking at research methods, for example, and I have 200 words, I would look at it, okay, question, context, methods of data collection, methods of analysis, and just write down a phrase for each one, right? And then string it together because we really want to pare it down. Imagine when you're super busy yourself and you ask someone a question and then they prattle. You don't appreciate the prattle. You're like, no, just get to the point. Just get to the point. Well, that's what you have to do to yourself. You have to pretend that you yourself are impatient with your own self and your own ideas and your own words, and you need to cut it down to the very basics because someone's only given you a minute. We have this when we're in business. I used to work at a business school. You have the 2-minute elevator pitch. You want to go on for 20 minutes. You got 2 minutes because that's all they're going to give you. So it is really discipline and a whole lot of editing, checking in and asking people, is this clear? Does this make sense? Do you know what I want to know? Can you see why I'm doing it this way? Just keep working it. Every edition, shorter, shorter, shorter. The hardest book I ever wrote was for Sage, and it was called the Social Science Jargon Buster, where you guys limited me to 500 words per entry. And I learned so much about writing tight. It is a skill absolutely worth developing because once you cut out the superfluous stuff, you'll never put it back in, even if you're allowed to. So practice writing tight. It is a skill.
Excellent advice. Thank you, Zina. Please keep putting your questions in the Q&A box. And while you are putting your questions, Zina, are there any other pieces of advice that you can give to students starting their academic journey or researchers that are working on their research projects?
I think when you're starting off, we generally enter research around an area that we have a passion about. And that passion can be really broad. And students generally either want to do, well, they all want to do too much, right? You want to know everything about it because you're passionate about it. So you really want to know everything. Or you want to know too many things. And so we stuff all of this into our thinking and into our proposals. And you have one question that has 3 different components. And if you really looked at it, you realize that's 3 different sets of participants and 3 different sets of methods that you'll need. A good bit of advice is to realize your job is not to solve the world's problems through one research process. It's not to get all the answers that are unknown. Your job is to add to an existing body of literature. Your job is to add value to problem solving or decision making around a particular area. And so what is needed? What do you want to provide and what is needed? Not everything that's needed, but how can you make a solid contribution to a body of knowledge? And you sometimes just have to make that decision. So I think that's the way to get started, is realizing you can't cover it all. What's the part of this that is most interesting to you? What's the part of this that is most valuable to whatever stakeholder group you want to serve, whether it's broader society, community, a workplace, a government agency? What would help that stakeholder group improve whatever challenge it is, whether it's poverty, whether it's a business, whether it's serving community? whether, no matter what it is, what can you do that will actually help in that situation? And you have to make the hard calls. You can't do everything. And when you're starting to write up your proposal, ask yourself, how many participant groups do I need to answer this question? Am I asking more than one thing, even though it's in one question? Of these things, where do I think the most value add would be? So that's how I would start the journey, just really getting that clarity that you have to make a decision about what you want to research. The second part around the journey that you asked, Helena, is making sure that you don't, once you have this, you don't have the time to break off into all of these tangents. Back in the day when I did my PhD back in the 80s, people were taking 5-7 years to do a PhD, and you could wander around and explore and do a million things. Now people want you to do complete in 3 years. So you just don't have the time. So use that clearly articulated research question as a way of determining whether or not you're on point. So you go down a tangent, ask yourself, does this tangent directly help me answer my research question? If the answer is no, let it go. If the answer is no, but I find this more interesting, think about whether you want to change the question. But if the answer is no and you like your question, move on. Put that down as something else you might do next time. But that going down the rabbit hole is a challenge. So keep bringing yourself back. How is this answering my question? Is this answering my question? You really want to stay on track that way.
Thank you, Zina. And another question that we had in our registration form, which I think is really interesting, is that someone supervised and successful researchers who supervised a lot of PhD students, and this researcher has written a lot of well-cited articles, but still some of the research proposals for some reason are not accepted for research grant. So what are the tangible constructs for writing a successful research proposal, and how can one achieve those? Do they need any specialized training?
Look, I think the number one thing you can do, Paulina, is have clarity. Very clear. Get that research question. I'm a stickler for the research question. I think that's one of the courses you had me do. Got to get that research question. You got to know what you want to know. If you don't know what you want to know, you're not going to be able to find a way to get there. So that clarity in your thinking. Once you have the clarity in your thinking, you need to bring that clarity to your writing. So I have seen professional authors tend to be a little too erudite, a little bit too verbose. So they have the concepts and the constructs. What we want to see is the logic, right? So if you go too theory heavy and give a lot of theoretical context, and it can be incredibly intellectual, it can be incredibly valuable. But if you're not in the word count, then you're not going to get a look in. And if you are in the word count, but you've gone theoretical, you're not giving me what I need as an assessor, which is the logic. So clear logic. If you were to give your research proposal to your best friend who's not an academic, your parents who might not be academics, and ask them, does this make sense? If they are a half intelligent person, they should be able to tell if it makes sense. They might not understand the particulars, right? But they can see if the logic makes sense. So yeah, does that make sense that I would talk to these people or I would do a survey? It should be logical to everyone and anyone. I am a relatively smart person. And when I have to work too hard to read something from someone who is a professor, and I have to actually work hard, you know what? I used to think maybe I'm not smart enough for that. No, I think that person is not writing with the clarity and the lack of ambiguity and the logic that they should be doing, because it shouldn't be hard work to read anything that is academic. And sometimes we do that We make it very, very intellectual at the expense of clarity and logic. And I would absolutely recommend that you do not do that.
Perfect, thank you. And are there any questions from the participants that we have in the Q&A box?
Yes, one question that I think might be really interesting, and I've heard a couple of people ask, is Zina, can you tell us about, you just mentioned that you're looking for logic, you're looking for clarity, but do you have any a systematized way of looking at research questions? Do you have sort of an assessment rubric or framework that you use? And if so, what is that?
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple of ways. When I started doing research, a lot of research was very much just knowledge for knowledge's sake. Now we're seeing more and more applied research, a research that is designed to help improve a situation, right? Something of value. And so one of the ways we can assess a good research question is saying, how can the answers help a stakeholder group? What is the value that these questions have to society? So one of the things you do when you write up your research at the very end is have recommendations. So think to the end. What recommendations, if everything goes right, I don't have to have the specifics of it, but who am I recommending this to, right? What are the recommendations going to look like? Who would they actually help? So I work backwards from there, and that helps me think about the question that might lead to eventually those recommendations. So I always have that target in mind. I think about how can I provide evidence to help in evidence-based decision making? How can I come up with a question that will lead to significance? One of the things that we talk about a lot in research is validity and reliability, right? Is it valid? Is it reliable? Is it replicable? Well, is it significant? Does it add value? Who is this helping? So I'm always assessing those questions around, all right, so what? And students hate that when they give me a research question and I'll help them articulate it. And there's like, how is that now? I'm like, well, all right, let me read it. And so why do we need to know this? Pretend I need to give you $50,000. You didn't convince me, right? I got one lot of $50,000 for 4 of you. Only one of you is going to win this prize. Convince me that this is worthwhile. So I'm constantly using that kind of logic. You want to make sure you have no ambiguous terms. You want to make sure you don't have, double meanings, all of those things. But just really having that logic in the articulation of question, making sure it's valuable. So there are a lot of tools like, is it right for the field? Is it right for you? Lots of rubrics that you can use to assess a question. But it really comes down to common sense. And I think we don't fund research, we don't accept people in the PhDs if you're just chasing butterflies. We want to know that there's something that you want to do that's going to lead to, hopefully, potential for impact. I told you guys I did my PhD back in the 80s, and it wasn't a question that we asked nearly as much. And so all of this amazing research has been done over the last couple hundred years. Most of it doesn't lead to anything. Sits in a thesis, sits on a shelf, sits in a consultant's report, nothing comes of it. I am looking for, and I think more and more people are looking for how your research can have impact. So that's where I'd be going.
Thank you, Zina. And do we have any more questions?
We have lots of questions. And one of them you sort of answered. They asked if you had any specific advice for writing research that you thought would particularly specifically to obtain funding, like when you are trying in your research, not to do peer research, but specifically to attain funding, if you had any specific features that you thought would make it more likely to get accepted. And I'm kind of building off what you had just said there about impact.
All right, so when you're looking for funding, you have to understand that, okay, so when we think of research, we think of it as very pure, right? And that it's not political and you have to be objective. Getting funding is a highly political process, right? You have to know what the needs are, who's making the decisions, what's the hot topics, what are their concerns? Do we have some media push behind something? Where are they going? You need to know where that pocket of money sits and how you can get them to open up those purse strings. Right? So it's an incredibly political person. I would be really aware. If I was going for a funding grant, I would know who got the money last year? Do they have any target areas this year? What are the pet projects that seem to always get up? How can I add to that? So I would try to give myself the best possible opportunity by knowing the expectations and the desires of the decision makers. And I think it's incredibly important to understand that research is a political process that's conducted, hopefully, in a pure, objective manner. But it sits in a political context, particularly when you're talking about the front end, getting accepted, getting the money, and the back end, which is getting your recommendations taken up. Those take a lot of political nous. So when you're trying to get up and get a proposal accepted, do your homework. Don't think that they're interested in what you're interested in. Figure out what they're interested in and see how that can work in with your interests, and see if you can find that marriage, that really overlapping of those Venn diagrams, or what they need and what you can offer overlap.
Perfect, thank you. I think we had one more interesting question from the also registration form around conflicting views and contradictions. And how can one address the conflicting views and contradictions about the important elements of the research proposal?
I always defer to the people who wrote up the template. So if it's, and my colleague may say one thing, my supervisor may say another, but what you generally research, you get a template anymore. Very, very often, very rarely do you get a blank piece of paper and say, here, propose something. Everything is template based. That's what you want to answer. Stick to that. They make the call of what's important, even if you don't agree. I work for one organization. I think their ethics application form is appalling. And I think it needs this section and that section instead of the ones we have. But not my call. I'm not on the ethics committee. I have no say over what goes in that form. So we make sure that that form is filled in the way they want it filled in. So I would defer to the decision makers. If there is scope within that form for two things, figure out who you trust. That's a combination of having enough knowledge that you trust yourself, get yourself up to speed with the background information, with the politics, trust yourself, and then who are the advisors you feel most comfortable with? Who are your most trusted people? And never give anyone a first or second draft, or even a third draft. Give yourself time to get things looked at by those people you trust, and make sure you have that logic. I would also always give my stuff, as I said, with proposals, to a lay person to make sure the logic is sound, even if you don't know the topic. But yeah, defer to those people who are the decision makers would seem to make the most sense.
Thank you, Zina.
Thank you, Zina. I'd love to piggyback on that. We have a lot of people in the chat. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. But so many of them have said that they are advising PhD students, or that they are those trusted advisors. Do you have any recommendations for them specifically when they're working with their students on crafting their research questions?
That is an exercise in exasperation right there. I tell my students that, they come up with this research question and they don't realize that getting a good research question out of a student is a process that takes time and time and time, and they reiterate and they don't know why they want to know this. And it is the hardest skill, I believe, and I think we just blow over it. I ask these agencies to come up with research questions and we have to rewrite them because it is a skill. And so my if I'm helping students write a research question, I'm constantly asking them, all right, what data would you get from this? What do you want to know? Is it specific enough? Does this make sense? Can you get the data that you need, right? How are you going to get the data? Do you have the capability of approaching that target group, getting the data that you need, analyzing that data? The recommendations that'll come from this, is this what you want? It's not clear. Is this what you mean? And in the end, what I end up doing with almost every student is trying to pull something out of their brain that's there, but it is a messy knot, and you have to just tease it out. Make sure they're starting with a question word, but expect the process to take time, and let your students know that it takes time. Let them know that their first, second, and third articulations of a research question will probably not be a very good researchable question. Let them know that this is part of the process. If I have a student doing something for a year, I don't think they nail that question until halfway through, because they're still modifying and thinking, and then they do their first interview and they realize it's not quite right. So it really takes time. And so setting that expectation right for them and yourself is important.
Excellent, thank you. We can take one more question from people at this particular moment, and I think then we'll have a couple more minutes at the very end of the webinar for a couple more questions. And is there anything else in the Q&A box?
Well, there's lots of ones, but one question that I thought was very interesting is, do you have any recommendations for people who are working on several research projects simultaneously, or several research projects all related to one core topic?
So just how to manage that?
Yes, how to manage that.
Yeah, I think that that's the place where I would definitely get like I'm a little old, so I'm a little old school. I love a whiteboard. I would get a big piece of paper on my wall and just really keep myself organized with timelines and topics and what goes where, because when you're managing 3 or 4 projects, my goodness, the way that they kind of mix together in your mind is very, very confusing, and you don't think it's going to happen because you think you have your head around everything separately, but then you can do an interview and you don't even know which column it goes in, or there's so much overlap. So I think I would map it. I would create some sort of map, and I would have it on my wall. I'm just looking at my walls here. I would have it somewhere big and make sure that I'm really keeping track. And for me, and I find this with my students as well, having a spreadsheet is good to have it on the computer because it's more updatable, but having something big that you just walk into your room and like hits you in the face and it's there is, I think, also very helpful.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Zina, for offering such fantastic insight. And I've already seen so many messages in the chat saying how useful all your advice is. And I just want to share with you a few use cases for online courses. And one of these courses, as we already discussed, is the research proposal by Zina. So here are a few examples of how you can use one of Sage Campus courses in your teaching and learning. Faculty, so if you're a faculty member, you can set Sage Campus course as a prerequisite for incoming freshmen or graduate students to prepare them with, be it critical thinking skills or literacy skills that they need to succeed in their courses. You can also use Sage Campus courses as preparatory material before a class, so that mixed ability students or students from a range of different disciplinary backgrounds can come to the class with the same level of knowledge. And this helps to improve student outcomes by ensuring that students with less experience don't fall behind, and the faculty have time to focus on their curriculum at the class. You can also support the development of your research faculty who want to upskill in the latest research methods and tools. and you can meet the demands of oversubscribed workshops so that everyone can get the support they need exactly when they need it. So finally, I just want to give you a little sneak peek into the new course topics that are in development for 2023. Based on the feedback from libraries and faculty about what critical skills students need and support with, we have developed these 3 courses. Firstly, it's working with transcribed data that looks at how to manage and sort transcribed data collected from interviews, surveys, and focus groups. It's also offer a nice progression for learners who've completed the Do Your Interview course. Then we have cleaning messy data. And this is one of the top challenges that we've heard from faculty, that students struggle with data analysis and of messy and incomplete data sets. So this course will teach you the fundamentals of cleaning messy data. And then the 3rd course is develop your search strategy. This course will help you decide which online search strategy is best fit for your research and gives you a lot of practical examples for carrying out a search using the most common approaches and tools. And I'm sure some of these courses really resonate with you as the main challenges while doing the research. So I think I'll leave a couple more minutes at the end for the questions, and just wanted to let you know that if following today's webinar, you would like to take a closer look at the research proposal or any other of our online courses, we do offer a 30-day institutional trials which can be arranged via your library. So you can request a trial for your institution. Please speak to the librarian to recommend Sage Campus. And we also have a demo hub, so you can have access through this demo hub to the first module of each of the courses as well. If you would like any more information about Sage Campus, please do let us know. I am now here on your screen. You can see the contacts of leads for all the regional leads for Sage Campus, so you can reach out to them. And we will send you all these slides with the information and the links so that you can then get in touch with your regional campus lead or set up a trial or recommend campus to your librarian. And now I'll stop sharing my screen again. And I will ask Anne if there are any final couple of questions that we can take today.
Well, I think just one of the questions that I really liked was about any resources, Zina, that you would point to for just how to get that real, concise, clear writing that you so emphasized is so important in this research question. How they can kind of operationalize all the things that you've been talking about today.
Is this where I plug my books? No, I'm just kidding. One of the things you can do is, certainly there are lots of guides and texts that take you through the research process. Sage has a few, I've written a few, and they can be really helpful. I like your little quick fix books. Sage has these little quick fix books just to help you out with these the key points. So there's lots of resources available, and definitely have a look at the quick fix and see, you know what, most of our content in research method stuff is similar. It's actually quite similar. Look for a tone of voice that is easy for you to relate to. It's the same thing when you have a lecture. It's the same thing when you're reading. Is it easy to read for you? Is it something that's speaking to you? Do you feel like the author is pontificating, and if you like that, fine, or do you want advice? Do you want their voice coming through? So that's really helpful. The other thing that I would do is, if you need to write up, let's say, a journal article, don't try to write one without having read them. And I'm sure we've all read journal articles, but have you read them in a way that makes it think, is this how I want to write? If I'm reading journal articles, when I first started needing to produce them for my own academic career, when I was reading journal articles, if there was a little lit review, because lit reviews are tough, especially in a small little article, a small little paper, I would circle that and put that in a file. Where like, oh, this is a nice, tight, clear lit review. I like the way they did that. So I ended up having a little folder file in my little file cabinet with journal articles that had really strong, simple, clear lit reviews. And then I realized I ended up going back, highlighted all those in yellow. And then in other papers, I had an orange highlighter. Where did they do the methods super clear and just logical and easy? So that really helped me when I had a repository of strong rationales. Man, that made sense. Man, I would buy that in a second. Whatever they're selling, I'm buying. It was erudite and credible and just strong, right? And then those research questions that just popped. I knew what they meant, even if it was a topic that I didn't. And then those lit reviews that, man, that's tricky. How did they fit in 47 references into 3 paragraphs? And I got it completely, and it made a strong argument. Where are the methods super clear? Even with only a couple hundred words, if I'm looking at proposals, read a bunch of them. And then look at who you want to emulate. I'm a big one for following by example. If you see something that's clear, what we tend to do is like, man, that was good. Never think about it again. Could never find it again, no matter how hard you look. So if you want to write and you have the need to or desire to read things in that genre, take note and keep track of your best exemplars. They will help you no end when you go to write yourself. So that's a weird resource that we don't talk about very often.
Great. Let's have one last question. I'm sure it's really hard to pick among the number of questions that we are receiving. And any last question?
It's a last question, but I think it's an important one. It might open up a little bit longer of an answer, so my apologies. But like, someone has asked about sort of the differences between proposals at different levels of research. So if you're an undergraduate doing a research proposal question versus a graduate student doing a research proposal question versus maybe a postgraduate, and talking about sort of how they might be similar or how they might be kind of unique.
Yeah, I think that all proposals at every level need to start with a good question. No one's now surprised that I'm saying that. It's a good research question. Now, I've seen great research questions because it's really shedding new light onto a topic at every level. Once you have that, regardless of the level, we are talking about clarity and logic. I don't care if you're in 10th grade doing something. In Australia, you have to do a little project in Australia in 10th grade if you're doing like a society course, or you are an accomplished academic. Clarity, brevity, logic, that comes first. Now, I'm going to expect something to have more references and be more erudite, and you're going to show me that one of the things when you're doing research, there's this barrier to entry because you're producing new knowledge. So I expect even at the lowest level, there's a standard that has to be met. But as you go up, you're expecting to be a little bit more erudite. You're going to expect a little bit more literature. I don't expect my undergrads to really know the field. All right, so they're going to have to look at the literature and get a sense of the field, but my expectations are that they don't know the field completely. And yeah, they're probably going to do research that someone else has already done and it's overlapped because they haven't found it, or it's, you know, in this little context of their community. When you go up, the logic stays the same. The need for a good question stays the same. But I want to see that when I read it, I'm like, yeah, that person knows what they're doing. That person is an expert in the field. If I was meeting them in a dinner party and they were talking, I'd be like, yeah, they're the business. They know their stuff. And it's just going to come through because of the way they engage with the literature, the way they engage with the methods. You know that they are player in the game already. They're not trying to get entry into the game. So with my undergrads, even people starting off with a PhD, you see they're trying to make it. They're trying to show that they know what's going on. They have that logic and brevity, but they don't really have full command of the methods language. They don't have full command of the literature. And then you expect to see that at a higher level. It sings, it just comes through. That's what all people should be doing research should aspire to, but certainly at the higher levels. When I get something at the higher levels and it is touched with a little bit of pompousness and they already know it all and they flaunt the rules. No, let's get back down to basics. Is it logical? Is it a good question? So that would stand for everyone. Anne?
I like it. Clarity, brevity, and logic. That's how we will end today's webinar as well. Thank you so much, Zina, for such an insightful conversation and for so many pieces of practical advice. I'm sure everyone really enjoyed your answers to the questions. And thank you so much, Anne, for moderating the chat and picking the most interesting questions. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.